all the candidates to go ahead and find your seats at the table here. Liz, can I get you temporarily and at his side? My name is Jamie Woods. I'm the chair for the Black Caucus for the state of Iowa. I do have a few handouts that I'll hand out and give folks information about the Black Caucus. Basically, we are a branch off of the IDP. Our chair for the party is on his way down. He is run into some accidents on the highway, so he should be here. Once he is here, we'll let him speak and introduce himself. I'm sure everybody knows who Troy Price is, but we'll let our chair speak to everybody. Again, thank you so much for coming out today on such a wonderful, beautiful day. I thank you for your time. We decided to have this forum so folks in this area could know who the people were that were running for Congress in their area. It's important for us to make sure that we identify folks that are running for office and to see if they share the same moral values that we share as constituents. So we want to make sure that people are able to ask questions to the candidates. There is a question box. I was passing around. I can go ahead and do that again. I don't know if everybody got an opportunity. There's paper and pencil in there. So if you're interested in a question, please fill it out and bring it back to the moderation table, and we'll have those questions answered for you. If we can't get all the questions answered, we'll make sure that the candidates get those questions, and then they can reach out to us, and we'll post it on our Facebook page, and we'll talk about it tomorrow on our conference call. The Black Caucus has a call twice a month. It's the first and third Sunday of every month. So we will also get that information to you folks if you want to just let me talk. I'd like to introduce my vice chair, Bernard Clayton, who lives here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Thanks, Bernard, for organizing this event in your lovely city of Cedar Rapids on this nice sunshiny day. And then I have, I'm going to be a moderator for today's event, and then your County Supervisor, Stacy Walker. So we have Abby Finkenauer. Did I say that right? Finkenauer, sorry. Thomas Hethcroft, okay. George Ramsey and Courtney Rowe. Abby is absent today. She had another event to attend in, I think, Marshalltown, which is right past here. Not sure. But Liz is going to read a letter from Abby's campaign for everybody. So if you give Liz Matthews an opportunity to read that letter from Abby.
Liz Bennett.
Bennett, I'm sorry. Bennett.
It's okay, I like getting promoted.
All right. That was quick.
Well, folks, I'm Representative Liz Bennett, and as Jamie said, I'll just read a brief letter from Abby Finkenauer. Dear friends, I'm sorry to have to miss the forum today, but I'm very inspired by the hard work and leadership of the Black Caucus. The work you do engaging Iowans in the Democratic Party is essential, and I can't thank you enough for it. I hope to visit with each of you soon in person. In the past 30 days, my campaign has held 16 meet and greets across the district, and I'm committed to getting to know the issues facing everyone in our district. Thank you again for all you do, and I look forward to working together to take this seat back in 2018.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, my name is Stacy Walker. I think I know most of the folks in the room. Again, as Jamie said, this will be an informal exchange. I think it can be very formative, and I think we can learn a lot and get a lot of our questions answered from our candidates here. So I want to just thank our candidates again for braving the weather and letting us know how important this event is to you and being able and willing to talk to your constituents. So thank you all again. I really appreciate that. I also want to take just a quick moment to recognize some of our elected officials and candidates that we have here. I'll begin with the chair of the Lane County Democrats, Brett Millis. Thank you. You just heard from Representative Liz Bennett, who is my state rep. So thank you, Liz, again for being here. By the way, would any of the elected officials and/or candidates like to share a few words?
Please do.
Yes. Well, I just want to thank everybody. First of all, the Black Caucus for holding this meeting here in Cedar Rapids. All of us grateful when my constituents have the opportunity to come and hear the opinions of different candidates right here in our own backyard. So thank you very much for that. year is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we could be doing right now. When I think about the work that I'm doing in the State House, so much of it can be confounded by the lack of care that we have clearly seen coming from Ron Plum. So I thank all of our candidates for running. I appreciate that we're having some substantive conversations, and just wish everybody good luck in our panel today. Thank you.
Excellent. Next, we have a current sitting state rep who is vying for a state senator seat, Representative Untitled.
It's a congressional forum, so I'm happy to be here with you good folks. And I would just only add that I'm a little upset about my current congressman because I have never heard from him. And he has this Frankie privilege, free mail. He is the biggest spender of the free mail privilege in the whole Congress. And I have not seen one single piece of correspondence from him. It's very sad. But there's clearly other reasons that we need to change him, and hopefully one of these people will be on the ballot. So I'm just here to say hello to that and hello to you. And my daughter is with me today. We do have to step out early, but we wanted to stop by and say hi and participate in a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you. And last, but certainly not least, we have Scott Phones, who is running for the State House in District 68.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, candidates. Look forward to a substantive conversation. This election is going to be critical. It's important. It's important at the state level. It's important at the federal level. Both the United States and Iowa are headed in a direction that we don't want to go. On the federal side, we're looking at $1 trillion deficits for as far as the eye can see. That's going to raise interest rates. That's going to squeeze our economy. That's going to create problems at the federal level. At the state level, we've got the same type of fiscal problems. We're not doing a good job of managing our money. We're giving $20 million to Apple and paying for that on the backs of people who are sending their kids to the University of Iowa, Iowa State, and UNI, and that needs to change. That's why I'm running. Thank you all again for being here. And unfortunately, like Todd, I've got to take off here in a few minutes. But I know it's going to be a fantastic discussion. These are outstanding candidates. I love all of you. You guys are great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, a couple housekeeping things. I do believe that there are restrooms. If you go out these doors, if anyone needs to use the restroom here, we do have water and some snacks available for you. The way I envision this happening is we have about 12 questions here that we're going to ask. We would offer and invite all of the candidates, if you want to answer each question. You don't have to answer each question. I would just ask that we sort of rotate who starts. So Thomas, if you start, and the next person for the new question, Mr. Ramsey, so on and so forth, so that it's an equitable starting position, because I know that matters on panels. And then we'll get to some of the questions that you have. We've sent around the question box, and we'll kind of sift through the questions, and we will ask them. We're only sifting through the questions and asking them because we, in our experience doing this in the past, sometimes people have the same question, so we want to make sure we're filtering. Outside of that, this should be fun and easy and informative, and thank you again. So we will get started. Thanks. First question.
So Thomas, once elected to Congress, what would be your first priority?
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you everyone for coming out today and braving the weather. I know I first need to thank my wife for actually driving us down here and getting us here safely. She was a trooper, white knuckling, so I didn't have to, so I could try to focus on this a little bit. But thank you all for braving this. As far as priorities, and I think the challenge that we're facing at the federal level is a lack of priorities. We're actually prioritizing the wrong things. We need to prioritize investments in people, ideas, and infrastructure. And so my very first priority in Congress would be getting an infrastructure bill passed that actually has direct investments, that doesn't sell out our infrastructure to toll roads or to Wall Street. And so I want to make sure that we are building an economy that values everyone, that gives everyone a shot to succeed. And the way we do that is by ensuring that we can get products to market, ensuring that people have broadband connections in rural Iowa so that they can connect to the 21st century economy, and that we're enabling small businesses to continue to grow. So I think infrastructure has to be our first priority.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of times people ask me about priorities, and as I travel all across this district, we certainly have an opportunity to talk to varying voters who have a number of concerns, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's safety and security in our communities. And so the one thing that I often share is that my first priority is to ensure that we're protecting the investments of voters who are sending me to Washington. I think we have a responsibility certainly to begin building the next generation of leaders, people who will see by example what we're doing, what I'm doing as a congressman, and then look at that example as a stepping stone for them to someday fill this same role. Look, there are 4 people who are running for Congress. I often come across people every day who say, "Hey, I'm glad you're doing it. I don't know why you would jump in this race. It's not something that I would do." This is a part of our democracy, and wanting to serve, being people who are committed to serving our communities, being committed to wanting to serve people throughout this district, and certainly to be able to serve this country, should be something that everyone should look forward to. And so my top priority is making sure that I become a better example than our current congressman, someone who is visible, someone who is accessible, and someone who is willing to listen to all issues, no matter who they're coming from, whether they're issues that are important to Democrats, or issues that are important to Republicans, or issues that are important to voters who are kind of stuck in the middle. And certainly, we can't forget those people who don't participate in our political process, because oftentimes, those are the voters, or those are the people who are impacted the most by decisions that are being made in Washington. And so my first priority is making sure that I serve as a proper example for the next generation of leaders who are going to be able to pick up the mantle and continue to move our democracy along as we continue to grow, stronger as a nation, certainly stronger as a district, and certainly stronger within our communities.
Ernie, before you go, can I say something?
We're going to keep a 2-minute timer.
After you get done.
Okay, fair enough.
Because they've all got to, so go ahead.
Yeah.
Because we know if we get politicians not limiting them out.
You're just asking.
I'm glad you clarified, because sometimes they tell us you got 45 seconds or 30 seconds. So.
You never know. It's anywhere from 10 minutes to
So
1 minute.
the next
so.
question, it will be just 2 minutes, so go ahead.
Fair enough. Okay. So I'm Courtney Rowe, and my background is I'm an aerospace engineer. And so when I look at our country, I just want to help everybody be their best, most productive self. I think that's how we get our country on track, and that's how we have the best country, is helping everybody be their best. So there are a lot of things that I have. I have some flyers over here that kind of list about 10 different things that I think are major priorities related to that. But I would say the one that is the most important to me, and is the most important to the voters that I've talked to across the district, whether it was at county fairs, whether it was at festivals, whether it was at events like this, is healthcare. And I just got a message last night from someone talking to me about how expensive their healthcare is and that they can't afford it. And I get messages at least once a week from people, especially after I gave my speech at the Medicare for All rally last year. People reaching out to me because I'm a cancer survivor, and I talk about how difficult that is for people. Most people in this country, after you get diagnosed with the big C, you get diagnosed with the big B, which is bankruptcy. That is the reality of healthcare in our country. If you have a major health crisis, even if you have the best insurance like I did at the best company, it's still so expensive. And so many people are struggling to pay for those bills. And we have a completely broken healthcare system. And that's why I've been promoting Medicare for All, single payer system. I'm running with a slate of candidates through Justice Democrats across the country. We have over 50 candidates that are running across the country. And this is a priority for us. This is our #1 priority, is to get in there and to make this change. And so we're doing that and one of the ways that we can do that is by not taking corporate PAC money. I'm not taking any PAC money in my campaign, because the healthcare lobby, the health insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies have prevented us from making the reforms that we need. And patients are suffering, doctors are suffering, hospitals are suffering. My wife actually works at a hospital as a chaplain,
in behavioral health units, so she sees how poor the situation is with mental health care, as they get overcrowded and they have so many people coming in because we don't have enough mental health facilities across the state. So I think healthcare it affects everybody, rural, city, everybody. It's been a huge issue, and so for me, there are a lot of important issues. I have a lot of issues that I'm really concerned about, but I think that's the number one issue here in Iowa, and I think it's the number one issue across the country. So,
Thank you, Courtney.
yeah.
This next question will be to Mr. Ramsey, as we kind of rotate who starts first. And we're just going to jump right into it. Do you understand, what is your understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement, and do you believe that Black Lives matter?
So it's funny you'd ask me that question, right?
We wondered about it.
We did have a conversation.
Does your life matter, George?
So it's not anything personal.
Absolutely, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter too. And I think it's really important for us to understand what this movement is about and what it means. This movement is not about creating an unjust or uncivil process for being able to bring to the attention of those who can make decisions to be able to improve the lives of people of color. This is a movement that brings attention to the disparity that exists between people of color and those who are not. And so, when we think about whether or not, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. My life is important. Everyone's life is important. But we've seen all across this country that there have been several, miscarriages when it comes to how people of color are treated compared to others. And so, I think it's important, certainly as a congressman and for our legislators who are here present, for us to take hard looks at laws and legislation that impact the lives of people of color, and whether or not we're creating fair and equitable legislation that allows us to address those issues at a more serious way. And not avoid having those kinds of discussions, but and that's certainly a priority for me. It'll always be a priority for me. I guess it was something I was born into, and certainly as I travel across this district and talk to people all over, it's a question that often comes up as well. So yes, Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Courtney, same question?
Yeah, Black Lives Matter. I actually was a national delegate in 2016, and we decided to focus on 3 issues while we were there on the floor. One was Fight for 15, one was to stop the TPP, and one was Black Lives Matter. And a lot of people know that I have a button press, and so the delegates from Iowa asked me if I would make buttons for those issues, and I did that. And so we wore those buttons on the floor at the Democratic National Convention. And I think that's really important. It's important to have that visibility, and I think it was important to have that visibility from a state like ours that nationally may not really be seen as some place where that's a priority. The other thing that I would say is I have some specific ideas on what we can do as related to racial injustice that exists in our society. Restorative justice is one of the items. You'll see it on my flyer. That's about criminal justice reform and helping people who have been convicted of crimes to actually be restored back into their community, restoring of their rights, and helping them to actually make amends for the crimes that they've committed, and then restoring them back into our community. We have a huge recidivism rate in our society of over 60%. So that means if you've been in prison, 5 years later, there's over 60% chance you're going to end up back in prison. And that's because we don't have a justice system that really helps with that. I also think we need to focus on training our police officers, both with unconscious bias training and also with de-escalation techniques to try to avoid these shootings and things like that when you have a confrontation. And then also on that, I think we need body cameras and microphones, and the federal government needs to help fund that, especially for small communities. So these are all ideas that I have on how we can help, it's one thing to say Black Lives Matter, but we have to have some meaningful reforms that will help that be reality.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yes, Black Lives Matter. And it's about recognizing that there is an implicit bias in the system against people of color, and being willing to stand up and say something about that. And frankly speaking, I recognize that as a white middle-class male, it is incumbent upon people like me and myself to be able to speak out and to share those words and to be able to fight those fights for people who may not be in a position of power themselves, or may be in a position where they are uncomfortable raising some of these issues. So as your congressman, I will commit to doing that.
Thank you.
Next question is for Courtney. Are you aware of some of the disparities that cripple communities of color?
Yeah, I think there are several. So one is just the inherent bias that we have when we talk about racial injustice in its current form. A lot of time when we talk about racism, we sort of think of, I think, what I call active racism, which is when someone is kind of actively going around and they're racist and they say racist things to people. But I think as a society, something that's sometimes called white privilege, and I also think of it as sort of passive racism, is that just inherent bias that all of us sort of have ingrained into us and that we may not realize, and then we have to check that. And so one, the communities of colors are suffering from that. Two, there's a lot of incarceration in our criminal justice system, and most of the time people of color have worse sentences for less crime. And once you have a felony on your record, especially with the system that we have now, you take away your voting rights, and so they have less representation in government. Poverty is an issue. Gun violence is an issue as well. Especially, I mean, we've seen things in Chicago has specifically had issues. So those are issues that I'm aware of, and I think just being as a representative, you're there to represent the people. So coming to things like this and going out and reaching out to people in those communities and making sure they have your ear for whatever issues come up so that you can address them is really important.
Thank you.
I'll go.
Pardon me?
Can I go next?
Sure, go
Let's
ahead.
keep the-
Oh,
If you want, you can. I don't care. I'll go. Go ahead, George.
all right.
That's fine.
Yeah, Thomas did first.
Yeah, that's fine.
But no, certainly there are a number of issues I think that have impacted communities of color. Certainly we could look at poverty. We could look at our education system. We can look at things that fair housing. We can look at certainly the disproportionality in prison sentencing. And I think when you look deeper at all of those issues, you really find one common thing, and that really centers around fairness and ensuring that communities that like the one I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, are not do not continue to be impacted in 2018 in the same manner that they were impacted in 2088 and 2078 and 1978 and 1988 and 1968. We continue this same cycle where we're still talking today about having being able to offer quality education for children of color, no different than we were talking about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And so, if we're going to break that cycle, I think it's really going to be incumbent upon us to elect Congress people who are going to go to Washington and be brave enough to talk about the issues that are important, and not just talk about those issues, but do something about them. And that requires us certainly to not just work on it from Washington, but to work on it with our state legislators, and to work with our city leaders to really, and our school districts, to really be able to do things that are going to break this cycle that continues to exist within our communities, so that everyone feels like they have a fair chance. And it's not just one-sided, or doesn't seem to be one-sided when people begin to think about that cycle and how that cycle needs to be broken.
Thank you.
So on the campaign, I talk about people being able to own their future. And for me, that's making sure that the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis are driving your future self and your ability to succeed. And I think you see the data, whether it's achievement gaps in our educational system, whether it's 1 in 3 black men being likely to be imprisoned in their lifetimes. There are discrepancies between people of color and white people, for that matter. And we have to make sure that we are addressing them, that we are seeing the whole solution and not just focusing in on some of the not just focusing, laser focus. These are big systems things, is what I'm trying to say. We have to think in a systems philosophy, if you will, where one bit affects each side. If you give a child greater educational attainment, they're going to have a better opportunity to succeed later in life. So if we're focused on early childhood education so that every child can perform to their God-given abilities, we have an opportunity to break the cycle of poverty for not just African Americans, but also for white Americans, and making sure that we're all moving forward in a way that brings an economy that works for everyone, and make sure that our communities are fully engaged with all of us. So I think there are a couple other things that have certainly been mentioned, whether it's housing policies or transportation policies, but I think we also have to be conscious of the fact that this is about higher paying jobs. How do we get higher paying jobs to every community in this state? And again, I'll go back to the fact that it requires investments in people, ideas, and infrastructure. It's education, it's healthcare, it's research, basic scientific research, and it's broadband connections, it's improvements and repairs in our schools. It's making sure that you have roads and buses and transportation so that people can get to work every day. So these are the things that I think we have to be focused on as a country and as a state. And it's not necessarily just limited to challenges that people of color may face.
Thank you.
Mr. Eckroth, you gave a great answer, and you are up again because we kind of got out of order.
Yeah.
So we're going to get back on track. This next question is for you. What do you think we could do to help elect more people of color into public office?
Yeah. I think having you here is one example of that. I mean, people need role models. I talk on the campaign trail about growing up in a home where there were 4 photos in my home. And everybody here has heard this speech a number of times. But in my home, there was Mother Teresa, who represented compassion. There was Dr. Martin Luther King, who represented conviction. You had Dorothy Day, who represented community. And President Kennedy, who represented his call for citizenship. These were people that I could look up to. Everybody needs ideals and people to strive to emulate. And the more people that we can have take that first step, it starts in our communities. It starts at taking a leadership role in your neighborhood. It starts by making sure that you have your own mentors, that people, our teachers, are seeking out students that have a desire to lead, a desire to be successful, and foster that creativity, foster that humanity. And so I think we have to do more to support those students and those people that that are looking to be successful. But I think we also have to make sure that we're talking about issues that affect everyone, that we're having these types of discussions, and that we're prioritizing certainly unique experiences. I think that's a major factor, that we have to recognize that different experiences, diversity is our strength as a country, and different experiences help make us a stronger, better country.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsey, what do you think we could do to help elect more people of color to public office?
So I remember when Jesse Jackson ran for president, and what it meant for black people at that time. I remember when Barack Obama ran for president, and what it meant to people coming from the same community. And so, you know, when I entered this race, I wasn't necessarily prepared for the idea that I would be only the 3rd black person to ever run for federal elected office in the state of Iowa, in the state's 171-year history. And here I am today. And you know, this afternoon I was with about 100 students over at Roosevelt Middle School for their youth empowerment program today, and just the feeling of engaging young middle school students and sharing with them that I'm running for Congress, and the expressions that come from each of them, no different than those that I felt when I think about people like Jackson and certainly Obama. And what it really helps me to understand is that, in communities like the one I grew up in, we need examples. We need people that we can look to who will make us feel that we can accomplish anything. And so I think it really goes back to one of the top priorities that I talked about, at the very beginning, and that is what kind of example are we creating for children of color that is going to prepare them for the next generation of leadership. Stacy, that means that people like you who have stood up to run for elected office, people like Dale in this community who have stood up, people like Mayor Quentin Hart in Waterloo, people who look like us, who are taking on the responsibilities to make a difference and to be a change in our community. Those are the kinds of examples we need to be able to ensure that young people can be better prepared to really pick up the mantle and take on the charge of leadership, to be more involved in our democracy, to be more involved in being community leaders, to be more involved with being people of service. Which is something that I've dedicated, most of my life to. And so, that I think is what's going to change and how we're going to be able to make that happen for children of color.
So I would say it's similar to, we kind of have similar questions about how do we get more women elected in office too, because we don't have, even though women make up over 50% of the population, they certainly don't make up 50% of our government. And I'll tell you, one of the best answers I heard on this, and this is weird because it's probably the only time you'll ever hear me quote a Republican, but Carly Fiorina came and spoke to us at the Women Lead Change conference a couple years ago before she was running for president. And before she did that, she was the CEO of HP. And when she came in there, she asked a question, how come we don't have any women in senior leadership positions? And then everybody was looking around and they were like, oh, women don't want these jobs, they don't want this. And so she made a rule that said for every opening in a senior leadership position, there had to be at least one female candidate in the last group of people. And they were like, oh, we can't find them. But she made this challenge, and she said, what happened was I didn't make them hire anybody. I just made them make sure that then we got to that last group of people, of 4 or 5 people, that there was at least one woman in there. And then what happened was these candidates that came in, they ended up having about 50% then of their women in their senior leadership over several years. And so I think the key is, and what she found out, what it was that women were more hesitant to kind of raise their hand and say, I want that next position. And I think that happens with minority communities as well, is that because you haven't seen those role models in the past, sometimes you don't have that confidence to step up and ask for it yourself. Whereas, white cisgender males often feel like, yeah, I can do that next thing and feel comfortable stepping into that role. And so people have to encourage those people into those positions. And so I think as a Democratic Party, we have to ask the question, whenever we have a race, if we don't have some minority candidates, if we don't have women in those races, we have to ask the question, why aren't there any candidates that are running from those groups? It doesn't mean that we have to vote for that particular person in that particular race, but we have to get more and more of those candidates as options, and then what will happen is we'll get more elected. So that's my
Okay, so George, do we need more gun control? Why or why not?
You say, do we need more gun control? I think some would argue that we don't have gun control, and so, look, I've been around guns since I was 17 years old. I spent 31 years serving in the military. And I had a brief split from active duty service where I served as a special agent for the Missouri Department of Public Safety. And so it's, here I am almost 50 years old, and a better part of my life has always been around guns. I own guns. I often go to the range to shoot them. And so, I do know that I've taken an oath a number of times to support and defend our Constitution, and so I'm a staunch advocate for ensuring that we're protecting the rights under our Constitution. But I tell you, I went to the movies yesterday, and whenever I go to the movies, I always choose a very specific seat to sit in the theater. I choose that seat because of incidents like the one that happened in Colorado. Where a gunman walked into a movie theater and started shooting people. I choose to put myself in positions like that because I believe that we should be able to go see a movie. We should be able to go to school. We should be able to go to church. We should be able to come to meetings like this one and not be in fear that someone is going to walk in and start shooting. And so I think it's time for this, certainly this country, and certainly time for this government to sit down and start having some serious discussions about making sure that we have common sense gun laws that don't allow any citizen to live in fear in this country. And we have a responsibility, I believe, to make sure that whether it's gun control or gun legislation, that we begin to make those decisions to make every citizen in this country feel safe. And so, yes, I do believe that it's time for us to start looking at enforcing laws and creating laws that make every citizen in this country feel safe.
So in a few days, it'll be the 1-year anniversary of my friend Sri's death. Sri was an engineer that I worked with for 4 years. We helped build the fly-by-wire program at Rockwell Collins. And he was having a beer with his friend, watching a basketball game in Kansas City after work, and a guy came in and decided to shoot them, and Suri died. So gun control is personal for me. At the same time, the favorite Christmas present I've ever received was when I was 13 years old. I got my first rifle. I love to target shoot. So I understand both the seriousness of people's lives that have been lost, and also the fact that there are a lot of responsible people who can safely own weapons. I just put a post yesterday that I'll be putting out on my website, hopefully in the next week, a detailed plan for what we can do to deal with gun violence in our country. It's going to involve an updated background check system that also allows for more flags. So the shooter in Parkland that just happened this week, someone called the FBI tip line 6 weeks ahead of time and reported that this guy was going to do this. And a lot of people are mad at the FBI because they didn't react to it and they didn't do anything. But here's the honest truth. Even if police officers had gone there, there's very little they could do until somebody actually shot someone. And we need to be able to flag people who are an imminent threat and to be able to remove those guns from that situation. And we need to flag them in our background check system that actually works, which it doesn't work right now, and to remove that. Women are most likely to be killed by their former or current romantic partner. We need to have background check systems that add for people who've got restraining orders because of threats of harm. These are different things that we can flag and remove these guns from people who are a danger. Almost every single one of these cases, there were so many signs. But right now, our legal system, there is just no mechanism to remove these guns from the situation, and that has to change. So I'm adamant about that, and that's a plan I'll put out in detail next week.
So Parkland was the 30th mass shooting in this year, 45 days in. And a mass shooting is defined as 4 or more people killed or wounded by a single shooter. We have a gun violence problem in this country. There is no way around that. We can't duck that anymore. And I refuse to believe that we have to choose between the Second Amendment and keeping our children safe. I think that's a false choice. I think it's a choice that's been set up by the gun lobby, and we don't have to accept it. I think there are 3 things that we should do to focus our efforts on reducing gun violence. That's first, lift the effective ban on research. The CDC right now can't even research the effects of gun violence. We can't even talk about it. We can't even understand the problems that it causes our communities and how to try to prevent them. The second thing we have to do is expand the background checks, to close the background check loopholes, whether it's gun shows or other opportunities, so that we know people have passed a background check to purchase a firearm. The last thing is similar to what Courtney had mentioned. We have to make sure that we are preventing access to firearms for people who have been convicted of domestic abuse or stalking. That is how we work to keep our communities safe. And so I think we have to, again, we don't have to choose between keeping our children and our communities safe and the Second Amendment. We can do both, and I commit to doing that as your congressman.
Can I add something else too? And certainly Courtney and Thomas will agree. I think it's time for us to stop laying blame every place else but to the real issue. And the real issue is whether or not these types of weapons, America's rifle as they call them, should be allowed for purchase on our streets. And the president went to Florida this week and certainly talked about mental health, the mental health state of the young man who did this shooting, and talked about everything but the real issue. And I think as a country, we have skirted around this issue so much. Even this week, we get a message from the Democratic Party that tells each Democratic candidate running for office to stay away from the topic of guns. And these are issues that I think are really important to people all across this country, and we have to address those issues. We have to talk about the things that are impacting our communities, and be bold enough and courageous enough to be willing to stand up for the things that are truly hurting our communities. And that's what it's going to take. And I think I would argue that any one of the candidates sitting on this forum would be willing and courageous enough to be able to take on that fight and take on that fight on behalf of all citizens in this state and certainly all citizens in this country.
I lost track for the next question.
I've lost track.
Let's go with ladies first.
You said it was informal.
It is.
I think we're at Courtney.
We'll go with Courtney since
Yeah, okay.
George just had the agenda in there.
He had to
Very well.
add his 2 cents, which was very well. Very good.
So what we're going to start doing for the audience is saying, we're going to start asking some of the questions that you gave us. Jamie mentioned that this is our community, so we should probably get some of our questions. This question reads, as a congressperson, what policies would you implement to advance equality for LGBTQ people, many of whom experience oppression both as people of color and LGBTQ?
So it's interesting because you timed that Black Lives Matter question, and then you asked the lesbian about LGBTQ rights, right? Okay. So
It's not intentional.
it's not essential, right? My wife's with me here today. Obviously, LGBTQ rights is important to me. I actually got started in politics fighting for LGBTQ rights. I just started my job as an engineer in Arizona, and every day on my way to work, I had to pass these signs that were proposing this Prop 106 there. And the idea of this Prop 106 was to ban domestic partnership rights as part of the state constitution in Arizona. And they had this, stand up for families was their motto for this, right? Because somehow gay people having any kind of rights was a threat to people's families. And, that just really bothered me. And so I had to drive by that sign every day to work, and I said, I have to do something about this. I just started my new career. I just moved across the country. I'm in a new place, but I have to do something about this. And so I started phone banking, and I started helping with that. And that's the first thing that kind of got me involved in volunteering in politics, and that was 11 years ago. So that's what I'll say there. I think the next step for the LGBT community is the Equality Act, which is basically adding LGBTQ protections at the federal level to the Civil Rights Act. Right now, there are a lot of areas where LGBT people can be discriminated against, and it's sort of a patchwork what states have coverage. I mean, we have some protection here in Iowa, although I think in the State House they're trying to overturn that. I think Liz was familiar with that. But right now we have quite a bit of protection here in Iowa, but across the country it's really a patchwork. So marriage is not the only right, but it affects housing and it affects employment, it affects healthcare, it affects all kinds of issues. And so I think the Equality Act is the best piece of legislation that's out there right now, and I'll be in support of that.
So, one thing that I think we keep in mind is that as Iowans, we don't expect a whole lot. I think we expect to be dealt with honestly, given a fair shot at success, and treated equally. And that should apply no matter who you love or what religion you are, or whatever it may be. And so making sure that we are cracking down on discriminatory practices in hiring, making sure that we're ensuring that spaces, that communities are open to the LGBTQ community, and making sure that there's not, that we're cracking down on perhaps, we're cracking down on making sure that there's, that we're reducing discrimination. Courtney is right in the Equality Act. We have to make sure that we're standing up for communities that continue to face roadblocks to their success. And I think the LGBTQ community continues to see that on a day-to-day basis. I think one way to also look forward is getting rid of conversion therapy. I think that's one way that we're damaging our children and trying to tell them that something is wrong when it's not. And so those would be a couple of things that I would focus on.
You know, I'm hoping that one day we'll get to a point in this life where we don't have to worry about having laws that are specific to people of varying colors, people who have different religions. And you know, I talk a lot on the campaign trail, and certainly if you look at the note on your table, talk about making sure that as a congressman, I'm fighting to ensure we have fair and equitable legislation that ensures that every American has an opportunity to live a healthy, prosperous life. That means that we fight for to ensure that every law that is passed is not something that will discriminate against people of color, people based on their choice of sex, or I'm sorry, their sex or their choice of religion. And so those are the kinds of things that I think that continue to harm us as a country, where you know we're choosing laws or making laws that are very specific to people based on various backgrounds, rather than accepting people for who they are, and setting laws that represent all people and not just specific people. But I know that until we get to a place where that can happen, we have to ensure that laws are in place that protect people, no matter what the issues are that are important to those that we're creating those for. And so, you know, I don't know if we'll ever get to it in our lifetime, but certainly, you know, as a congressman, it's something that I'm going to fight for. It's something that is important to me and will always be important to me, to make sure that every citizen has a fair chance and is not discriminated against based on you know, who they are, and we're doing all the things that we can to protect that.
Just as a quick follow-up before we get to our next question, Mr. Ramsey, you mentioned that you would advocate for legislation that's fair and equitable despite a person's race, religion, or sex. The question asked about, I guess we would call it sexual identity, the LGBTQ community. So inherent in your response is, do you mean that you would fight for individuals of the LGBT?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, just want to clarify. Our next question, we are actually going to have a young gentleman here read it or ask his own question. I think you all know him. You've probably seen that several events. Fade, do you want to ask your question?
What are you going to do about the can shit bottle bill?
This is a bill I think is matriculating through the state legislature right now.
hopefully we're going to pass it. We might have to use it as an amendment to the bill in the Senate, but we do have a bill that will expand the bottle.
Representative Artsday, do you want to give a little bit of context here on
I
what?
don't want to distract from what you're doing.
Okay. Do you have an opinion on the bottle bill in the state legislature right now? And in fairness,
Well, if Art supports it, I support it.
I'm not entirely sure. In fairness to the candidates, I'm not entirely well versed on the bottle bill. So
I think if I can, is it basically that right now the Republicans are trying to repeal the 5-cent deposit that we get, right? And because groups like Hy-Vee and other places are saying they no longer want to sort of manage this, and they're sort of lobbying for this to go away. And right now, that's part of our recycling program is to have this
There are
deposit.
two bills, one
Okay.
in the Senate to end it, to replace it with curbside recycling, and one in the House that has just died, but it has bipartisan support, it's over 20 Republicans, 20 Democrats, and so on. And hopefully we will, when we get the Senate bill, we can amend it, strike after, get rid of the Senate part and put the House part in, we might have a good bill. Hopefully that'll happen before the year's over, which would expand it to sports drinks, water bottles, and other things, and adds 1 cent to the handling fee.
Okay.
So it would be a good bill. So we've got polar opposites that are occurring.
Right, okay. Yeah, so I support any recycling initiatives and environmental initiatives in our community. Obviously, this is a state issue right now, but I think recycling is one of the most important things that we can do to make sure that we're reusing the resources that we have and that we produce, and to cut down on pollution and runoff and waste in our community. So, I support any efforts that can expand that program is great, and definitely would oppose any efforts to get rid of something that's helping Iowans focus on recycling. So.
Somebody else have any comment on that?
You agree on that one?
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
I say thank you to Representative State. I believe Representative Bennett's leadership on that issue.
So since my partner in crime has stepped out for a second, I will ask the next question. Oh,
Go ahead.
okay, I'll ask the next question that came from the audience. This one is going to be a tough one. I'll just let you know that. What role should the U.S. play in brokering peace in the conflict between Israel and Palestine? What solution do you support? A two-state solution or otherwise? And I'm not sure where we are in the order, so if we have any volunteers.
I'll go first. It's fine.
This one will start.
So, my wife is Jewish. I have an interfaith family, and that's been unique to me. Growing up here in Iowa, I was not exposed to a lot of Jewish people, if you will, and so it's been eye-opening. But I want to say, I only preface that by saying I've now had a chance to discuss the issue relatively frequently. But we need a two-state solution in the Middle East. There has to be a two-state solution that provides for security for Israel and for recognition and human dignity for the people in Palestine. And to do that, I think the United States is in a unique position to be able to help broker that. We cannot dictate that solution. It must come from the two countries, the two negotiating countries on their own. And we can certainly help facilitate that. We as the United States have significant interest in the region to make sure that we are finding a solution. But I do believe that we can do our best to continue to move that discussion forward and make sure that we find, again, a solution that recognizes and ensures the security of Israel with also the human dignity of the people in Palestine.
Yeah. So on my website, I do talk about U.S. And Israel relations on my website. I'm in support of a two-state solution. Certainly, I think the president's decision to move the embassy only complicates things at this time. And so I think as a nation, we should be certainly willing to sit down and work with both nations to help them to work through the issue of creating a two-state solution. And so, it's incumbent on us certainly to be able to maintain our alliance with Israel, but it's also incumbent upon us to be the leader that we are as a nation, to work with them to be able to come up with a way to be able to resolve it.
So in 2015, my wife and I were at our church's National Synod, which is a big national meeting every 2 years. So for those of you who don't know, my wife's a minister, so I get to go to fun things like this, where we have like week-long conferences. But something that really was interesting that year, one of the big things we do nationally is talk about national resolutions. And one of the resolutions that was put forth was on the issue of Israel, and would the United Church of Christ at the time speak out against the violence that Israel was perpetrating on the Palestinians. And what was interesting is the people who were advocating for this were actually guests to our conference who were Jews that traveled from Israel and were asking us to speak out against the violence that was perpetrated by the Israeli state. So this isn't, I think it's kind of important to understand what's going on there in that dynamic. I totally support a two-state solution, but the situation that we have right now is that the Palestinian people have basically no political power. And as a country, we have been talking about two-state solution, like for decades, since I was a kid, when they had the Middle East Peace Conference in Dayton, Ohio, where I grew up. But we have not advocated for that as a country with our policy. And so if we are advocating for a two-state solution, we have to make sure that the assistance that we're giving to Israel is tied to them working towards that solution. And so that is something that I think we have to be stronger about. I totally support Israel's right to exist, their right to defense, but right now the Palestinian people need us to speak up for them, and the people in Israel need us to speak up, because nobody is challenging this violence that's going on there. And we as the United States are in a unique position to do that. So I think we have to be more vocal about that.
I just got to say, I've been to a lot of congressional forums, and we don't really hear thoughtful answers on really complicated questions like that. It hasn't been my experience. I've been in politics for a while now here in the state of Iowa, so I appreciate the courage of our We've got a few more questions to ask, but I want to take a moment to recognize a few people who have entered the room since we began. The first is Representative Art Stade, who's here with us. And our latest arrival is the chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, Mr. Tory Price. I know you folks didn't come here to listen to me, so I won't take too much time. Sorry I'm late. I got stuck in about 4 different accidents on the way over here today. So so I do appreciate everyone who's here today. We'll be braving the weather outside, and particularly want to thank our candidates for being here today and participating in this forum. And really want to thank Jamie and Bernard and everyone with the Iowa Democratic Party Black Caucus for all their work. This is a great event, and I hope we have more of these in other parts of the state, because I think this is a great opportunity for our candidates to be able to hear from our different constituency caucuses and answer some questions that folks need to answer too. So I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for everything that all you folks are doing out there to get educated on the race, to meet our candidates, to go out there and advocate, and look forward to working with you all. We're going to have a great year in 2018. So thank you all for everything.
Okay, next question. What role should government play in kindergarten through 12th education, K through 12? Anybody have a stab at it? Remember, this is informal.
Well, I think we should certainly start at the pre-K level and not just focus on getting students or ensuring that every student has access to quality education at the K through 12. But it's really important, I think, for us to begin that process at the pre-K level. And we're starting to see, certainly in states like this one, where government is involved in our education and decreasing funding. We need a government that will budget for the future generations of this country. We need a government that will champion the future readiness of our young people through through education, through making sure that they have opportunities for middle skills labor jobs, and even preparing for those who want to serve our country. And so that's what I think is really important for us as a nation, as we begin to really think about whether or not it's more important for us to invest $28 billion into building a wall or invest $28 billion into educating our young people. And so we've kind of, I think, missed the boat in ensuring that that as a legislative body, our priorities are in order with regard to making sure that the future generations are prepared and they have the opportunities to be able to take on. I mean, we are living with, I think, one of the oldest bodies of legislators in our history. And when we look back at who is beginning to take up the mantle to replace a lot of our elected officials, there's a very small line of folks standing in line ready to do that. There's a very small line of folks who are receiving the resources that they need in education to do so. And so, as a government, I think that we need to continue to make sure that that we start early and we continue to make that investment.
Thoughts on K-12 education?
Yeah, so obviously a part of my platform is tuition-free college and trade school. That's after that, but I think making sure that students have something to strive for, and that would be guaranteed to students who do well in high school. So one, giving them that opportunity. A lot of kids right now are like, well, if I do well, I don't have an opportunity to go to college or go to trade school because I can't afford it. To kind of pair it on yours about pre-K education, children's capacity for their brain to develop and to grow and to learn is set by about the age of 5. And so kids who aren't getting access to learning and learning opportunities before they get to kindergarten are at an extreme disadvantage when they actually get to that point. So I think we need to look at expanding education to before kindergarten as well in those programs. The other thing I would say is we have a lot of standards that have come out for K through 12 education and standardized tests, and I know the teachers kind of go crazy about those. I think it is important for the federal government to set those standards, but I also think it's important for the federal government to write those tests. And the reason why I want to point that out is that right now there is an industry of test writers that write these tests in such a way that it's impossible to pass the test unless you buy all their training materials. And so we've basically been robbing school districts and schools of money so that they can have these special formulated test booklets and information so they can go and pass this test. The test should be basic standards that you need to know for math and for reading and those sorts of things. And the federal government should write that and provide those resources for free to schools. That should not be something that schools have to pay for themselves to meet that. Standards are important to make sure that everybody's getting access to the full education, but it needs to be something that's explicit and clear, and that the federal government's paying for. Thank you.
So I had the fortune of working for Senator Harkin on education issues, actually, at the federal level. And so I have seen some of the things that I think we can do and should do moving forward. The first thing I want to say, just to be clear, though, is that states have to set the standards. The standards can't be coming from the federal government. States know, localities know what our students need and the ways that they can be most successful. But one thing that I worked on for Senator Harkin was improving our schools. School construction, repair, and renovation. Our schools should be palaces. They shouldn't be run down. We shouldn't be worried about lead poisoning in our pipes or having paint peeling off the walls. We want people and students to want to be in their school. And we want families to want to come to their community school and enjoy the experience and be part of that community. Having a good school building is part of that. I think there are a couple other things without taking up too much time, but reducing attainment gaps, that's something that the federal government can focus on. We can continue to provide Title I funding to make sure that we are doing our best to reduce the attainment gaps. I think a second thing, or a third thing, frankly, that we have to do is fully fund IDEA. Students with disabilities deserve every opportunity in schools as any other student. And it is the federal government's responsibility to live up to the law that they already passed and actually fund it. And lastly, I would say that the Department of Education, what they really should be doing K through 12 is disseminating best practices. They should be doing the research and helping teachers and superintendents understand what works in some schools and might help them be more successful in their own classrooms and in their own school systems. We shouldn't be switching out superintendents every year because of poor performance. All that does is harm students. We have to make sure that we're focused on students and helping them achieve everything that they're capable of.
Okay, good, so we're gonna change some things up. We're gonna go to a lightning round. We're gonna
You
get
buzz in?
1 minute.
1 minute, all right.
And with that said, I've got quite a heck of a twofer for you.
Okay.
So as a point of privilege, I'm going to ask one of the questions that I developed. First part of this question comes from me, and the second part of this question I'm borrowing from a friend, Norm Sturzenbach, who said he's going to start asking all candidates this question. You might have probably seen him tweet about this before. The first part of the question is, what differentiates you from your peers who are running in this Democratic primary? And the second part of the question is, what is one issue you'd be willing to lose an election on? Who wants to start?
Is it my turn first?
Lightning round just got interesting.
You know, I think certainly the one thing that separates me from or differentiates me from others in the race is my personal and professional experiences. Being the oldest candidate in the race, I've had an opportunity to experience a lot of things in life. When most voters think about the issues that are important to them, I've lived through those experiences. Growing up in a single-parent home, having to work, attend a different school each year from kindergarten through 6th grade. Growing up in poverty, growing up in schools that were recently desegregated, and having an opportunity to overcome those challenges, and certainly serving my country, and being a prideful Democrat, someone who is willing to step up and serve. The one thing that I would say I would be willing to not back down on, and if it had to deal with me possibly losing this race, would be living up to who I am as a candidate in this race, and understanding that I won't back down from who I am and what I represent, the values that I represent, the things that my mother raised me to believe in, believing in God, trusting myself, doing right by others, and helping those in need. And so if it came down to a matter of whether or not I was willing to do those kinds of things for the people in this district, choosing people over politics, then I choose the people above anything else.
So I would say I've kind of already put out there what it is I'm willing to lose this race over. I'm not accepting any PAC donations. And one of the reasons that I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that you can see every single person who donates to my campaign. Campaign finance reform is the underlying problem to basically all the ills in our country. Why don't we have universal health care when every other modern country does? Campaign financing. Why don't we have the gun control and regulation that we need? Because of the gun lobby, campaign financing. You can look at every single, why don't we have green energy, clean energy? Why aren't we leading the way on that? Because of the oil lobby. So every single one of these things, and we get Democrats in there, and I think that so many of them have the best intentions, but they always are looking at, I need to win that next election. And it comes down to that campaign financing. And so I have made this pledge, and people, when I came out there to run, every single person who's a politician told me, Courtney, that's the craziest thing you could ever do, because there's no way you could win. And I said, well, if I can't win, then there's a problem with our system. If I have to take money from these people to win, then there's a problem. And if I have to run every time because nobody else will run on this, then I'll run every time to talk about this. So that's what I've staked my campaign on, and I want you to know, and this allows me to come out and support all these issues that I say, Medicare for all, single payer. I don't have to mince my words, because I'm not worried about somebody not giving me a donation for that. And I've had over 1,500 donations to my campaign. A lot of them are only $1 or $2, but it's individuals that are believing this in this platform. So that's what my campaign is all about.
So I think I bring to this race a certain level of experience, and it's a matter of understanding how you actually get change accomplished and move it forward. I served for Senator Harkin and on Agriculture Committee, as I've said it, worked with him on the 2008 Farm Bill. They got more votes than any farm bill since 1973. I took on education, as we discussed earlier, foreign affairs, labor policy. I served in the Obama administration as a deputy chief of staff in the Department of Labor. And I've served in the private sector as a corporate reformer, leading a global team focused on eliminating child labor, slave labor, and poor working conditions around the world. Making sure that we're creating an economy it's not built on the backs of people or damaging the environment. So, yeah, I'm not the oldest candidate on the dais here, but my experience being able to take people who I don't necessarily agree with all the time and being able to move the discussion forward and to find solutions that actually keep us moving forward is why I'm in this race. Because we can't settle for the perfect, or we can't wait for the perfect to come. We have to be able to get things done because people's lives and their livelihoods are demanding it. And so that's what I think I bring to the race, because I know how to get it done. And as far as something I would be willing to lose an election over, it's expanding healthcare. We must continue to expand and make quality, affordable healthcare available to everyone. And if that means losing an election over it, then I'm willing to do that. Here, I got another one.
I got some here. Okay. Oh, there's none.
I mean, unless we're saving it for later, I don't know.
Next
I'm trying to be
question.
sly, but
Considering the unemployment rate for Iowa is around 39%.
I was getting ready to say. What happened there?
Like, what happened, dude?
Somebody look.
Considering the unemployment rate for Iowa is around 3%, how do we attract professionals and diverse workforce in Iowa's first district?
Okay, I think it's me first.
Yeah.
So I actually, worked for years in town here looking for engineers and helped in that interviewing process. And we had a real hard time recruiting and hiring people here in the community. I think it's, here's what we could get. When we got people, I would often joke, this is something we're not allowed to ask in an interview, but I would say, especially when we were trying to hire, college grads, is I would be like, do they have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Are they getting ready to get married and have kids? Because then I can sell them on our great school system, right? This is the sort of things I can talk about. Because as an aerospace company, you're competing with a lot of companies out in California. There's a lot more interesting things to do out there if you're a young single person in California than there is here in Iowa. Let's just be realistic. But if you're getting ready to start a family and you want to buy a house and you can send your kids to school, this was the great place to be. The Republicans in our state house have really attacked our school system, and I think that's going to be really hard for people to recruit without that.
Remember this round.
Lightning round, sorry.
Thomas?
All right, I didn't know how serious we were on the lightning round. But so I think, as I discussed, investing in people, ideas, and infrastructure, that's how we actually move the economy forward. It's not tax cuts for billionaires and corporations. You invest at the bottom and let it percolate up a little. And so we have to make sure that we're taking advantage of the things that we already have here that are successful for the state of Iowa. So let's invest in biotechnology. Let's invest in bio-research and make sure that we're creating jobs for tomorrow. I think opening up, whether it's opening up the ability for basic research and develop from companies, making sure that entrepreneurs feel the ability to start a business here, and that again takes investment in infrastructure, particularly based on our broadband connections for rural areas, so people can live and work where they want to.
Under time. 37 seconds. All right, Mr. Ramsey.
So obviously the jobs are here. It's the people that are missing. For those that don't know, the gentleman back there, Dr. Burt is a good friend of mine, and I've worked extremely hard since moving to this state in 2012 with my wife and daughter to encourage other professionals like myself to choose this community to move to raise their families, because there are jobs here. There are good paying jobs here. Dr. Burt and his wife Nancy are an example of that. People that we know that have the qualifications to move to a community like this one to help broaden the diversity. But we haven't stopped there. We know that most people will choose to come to Iowa because they live here, and so we've been working extremely hard to help educate young people who live here in our community and prepare them to go to college, prepare them for apprenticeship programs, because we know that they're going to be the ones who are most likely to stay in this community, to be able to help grow this community, to help keep this community, to make it more diverse. And so we've been working extremely hard to make sure that we're doing that with young people, and we'll continue to be able to do that.
Thank you. It's been said that the federal budget is a moral document in the current budget's debates.
You said amoral or immoral?
It's a moral
Okay.
document.
It's a moral.
So that it's a moral document.
Yeah.
In the current budget debates, we're seeing problematic appropriations that increase instances of injustice around the country. What would you consider essential to a more just or humane budget?
Well, hey, I would say elect one of us to go to Washington. I mean, if Democrats in control, I would argue we'd have a lot more moral legislative policy. The Republicans are doing a very good job, I think, of stripping and attacking all the things that should morally be safe for its citizens. And so, if we want change, let's flip this district and let's send Rob Blum back to Dubuque, where he probably truly wants to be, and let's help other Democrats get elected in other districts across this country, so that we can get back to having more moral legislation. But that's the only way we're going to change it, because we're going to continue to be in the same boat here 6 months from now if we don't do everything that we need to get others like you who are here today in the voting booth to vote to change that.
Right on time. Anybody else want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So, yes, I think it is a moral document. People always, Vice President Biden says, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget. And I think that's true. When you see what the Trump administration is doing by trying to balance tax cuts for billionaires on the backs of Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP recipients, it's ridiculous. We have a social safety net so people don't fall through the cracks. So you get a hand up, not a handout. So you can take on your life and take charge of it again. That's what we need in this country. We don't get it by hoping that we're going to get charity coming down from corporate CEOs. What we have to do, again, especially here in Iowa, I think we also need to recognize what's happening at the U.S. Department of Agriculture that is ruining our small communities and leaving them behind. We are gutting the rural development program. Small communities can't even update their sewer systems. If you want to talk about clean water quality and making sure that people can live a healthy life, we have 100-year-old sewer systems that we can't upgrade because we can't get loans from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to do that. So that'll cover it for me.
So I would just look at a couple of things that have happened in the last year. So in the fall, there was an $80 billion increase to the defense budget, which is now over $700 billion. To put that into perspective, and by the way, most Democrats voted for that too. To put that in perspective, to pay for the tuition for all the colleges and trade schools of all the students in the country would be $75 billion a year. So $5 billion less. And nobody even asked how we were going to pay for that. Nobody even asked the question, where are we going to come up with this other $80 billion? This tax plan that the Republicans just passed is going to cost us $1.5 trillion. For $1.4 trillion, we could cancel all the student loan debt in the entire country. Now imagine the economic impact that would have. Way more than this tax plan. So when Republicans talk about these economic things that they're doing to stimulate the economy, they're not being honest. And I think our budget is definitely a moral document, and it's not even functionally being done the right way, so.
We recognize the gentleman from the floor, Mr. Bernard Clayton.
This ought to be the hardest question of the day.
If elected to Congress, would improve the lock and dam system on Mississippi River through Iowa, would that be a priority?
Improvement on the lock and dam system of Mississippi.
Yeah, that goes to my focus on investing in infrastructure. I think being able to get our product to market is extremely important, and making sure that we have a lock and dam system that works, that is efficient, that reduces the amount of time that barges are spending on the river, I think is important for us. And especially when you have an ag community and an economy that depends so much on agricultural products getting to the places they need to go, we have to make sure that we're putting our money in the places that we get the biggest return on investment.
Super lightning round. Anybody else want to talk about locks and dams?
Thomas did a great job. I think certainly we talk about the lock and dam system, but I think it goes beyond more than just what happens on along the Mississippi. We've got to make sure that our roads are rideable, and that other ways of being able to transport our products all across this state and from state to state can be able to get there. And so there's much need for lots of work in terms of infrastructure. We've got to think about our small farmers across the state as well, who are struggling to be able to keep up with corporate farms. And those are many of the types of things that are necessary as we continue to think about what can be done to improve the infrastructure of this state, if we're going to be able to create an equal access for all those who have products that need to move, and certainly as we think about how well we're able to transport and or be able to move across from side to side across the state. Stacy, he keeps those fingers down. You have thoughts in your mind, and you're like, okay, he's got 3 up there, and then he gets to 1. And, it's like, dang, man, he's gonna make me cut off.
So yeah, I mean, one of the first points I have on here is sustainable agriculture and water quality, and that includes investments in those things that are necessary. I 110% will support updates to the lock and dam system and making sure that we have what we need. In Congress, when you talk about the budget, that's something your Congress people do, and they should do, no matter if they're Republican or Democrat, is advocate for the infrastructure needs in your community. And I think you do that by talking to people about why this is important and how this affects their states and making those connections. So that's something that I would do.
Right. So this question is for me.
Okay.
As a student of politics and just kind of my first foray into electoral politics myself, I've heard often that people are more drawn to candidates more so than they are to political parties, much to the chagrin of Troy Price and the here today. What are your thoughts on what does it mean to be a candidate? What is your role as a candidate? What do you perceive to be your job as a candidate running for federal office?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's to speak about the issues. I think the reason why we've lost support in the Democratic Party and the reason why our candidates have lost recently is because we don't come out with a platform. We don't specifically say what we're going to try to get done. We're so worried about saying something that's going to upset some independent voter somewhere that we're afraid to talk about what we actually want to do and what we're trying to do. And so as a candidate, that's why I always talk specifically about what I'm going to do and what I'm going to try to do, because I think that's what voters want to hear. That's what voters have told me they want to hear. They want to hear exactly what we're going to go do. And so I think it's important to do that as a candidate and to push that platform. And I think it's important as a party that we get real about our platform. That's not something we decide at 2 in the morning at our conventions. and then get mad about things being put in there, which we had happen at the last state convention. But it's something that we take seriously. So.
Okay.
Do we all go?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm willing to sit.
Sure, I'll go.
Yeah, more questions.
All right.
Anybody else want to take a stab?
Well, yeah, I'll, I think we have a duty to serve, and that's what my responsibility is. I'm not running because I want to be a congressman. I'm running because I want to be your congressman. I'm retired from the Army, and I get a pension, I get some disability. I was working a full-time job that I thoroughly enjoyed. That I finally had to make a decision of whether or not I wanted to be halfway in or halfway out, or all the way in or all the way out, to be able to serve people in this district. And we argue every day. We see the messaging every day about Rob Blum. And how inaccessible he is, or how unavailable he is, or how detached he is from voters, all citizens and residents in this district. And I think as your next congressman, my role is to serve everybody, Republican, Democrat, and independents, and those who aren't registered to vote or who won't vote in this district. And that's what my role is and what my responsibility will be.
So I think as a candidate, it's our responsibility to lay out a vision, to show people that there's a better way, that there's a different way, to create a more perfect union, to help us get closer and closer to that eternal goal of being a more perfect country. And I think it's our responsibility as candidates to lay out that vision, to provide examples of how we get there, to talk about how we do it by getting the most people there, and making sure that we're motivating people to join us. And I think that's our goal, I think, as candidates everywhere, is just say that we have some good ideas, and I hope that you'll join us to help make a more perfect union.
Okay. Next. There is a shortage of mental health beds in Iowa. What are the thoughts about needing reforms for mental health care in our state?
So I work for Four Oaks. And certainly we're responsible for providing a lot of those beds to a lot of children across the state. And it certainly, I think it goes well beyond whether or not there's a shortage of beds, but we also have a shortage of mental health professionals. And that, I think, is where the true shortage exists, in making sure that we have the qualified people necessary to be able to care for those who are dealing with mental health challenges. I know that for Four Oaks, for example, a lot of our funding was state funding, and a large portion of our funding comes from the federal government. And so I think it's important to ensure that agencies that are servicing our residents who are dealing with mental health challenges have the resources and certainly the federal funding that's necessary to ensure that they get the service they need.
Thank you.
So my wife works as a chaplain in the behavioral health units at the local hospital. That sounds like an incredibly difficult job to me, and I know that it is. I think the stories that I've heard from her and what's really going on is basically our healthcare system in general. Hospitals are having a really hard time paying their bills, and especially when it comes to mental health care. The insurance companies are all have different ideas on pre-approvals for the different treatments, and you can't get things paid for. They're operating in the red in rural areas. A lot of hospitals have closed down, and mental health facilities have closed down because they can't get the funding that they need. And I think a universal single-payer healthcare system would help address this, because this way hospitals and doctors know that they're going to get paid, and they can plan. They have one system in order to file under, not 10 different systems. So I think that's essential to healthcare in general, but also to mental health care.
Thank you. Anyway,
Yeah, so I was at a mental health legislative forum in Cedar Falls the other day, listening to some of our great leaders from the state legislature. what struck me was that not once did they say, you know what, folks, we can't do it by ourselves here in Iowa. We need help from the federal government. Mental health is not a state of Iowa, just a state of Iowa problem. It's an entire country problem. And we can do everything in our power here in the state of Iowa to get more beds, to get more professionals, but we need help from the federal government. I think the federal government can provide incentives to get mental health professionals here, whether it's reducing their student loan payments or giving them loan forgiveness. I think it's a matter of, again, treating mental health on par with physical health. You can't separate the two anymore. And reducing that stigma that goes along with it. A friend of mine is the CEO of a hospital in the district, and he said, you know what, Thomas, the number of instances that we see people in the hospital would be reduced if we could just treat their mental health challenges first. It manifests itself in all other places in your life.
How do you feel the brown-gray divide has affected our current political climate?
And just some context, because I had to ask about this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the brown-gray divide, as I understand it, is there is an older sort of generation of white Americans, and there's all other communities of color. There's a divide, whereas, Bernard, you have to tell me if I'm doing this question justice. Whereas there is an older generation of white Americans that control most of the wealth in this state, and the communities of colors are trying to retain wealth. There's a growing disparity between the two demographics. Is that right? Okay.
Probably not for Stacy, but and you expect us to answer this question too, right?
1 minute.
Right. Better make this one a 30-second question.
Okay, some context to it is the brown-gray divide is currently in the country, the individual in this country will tend to make a decision about how resources are going to be spent, education resources, etc. Happen to be white, they happen to be older, they have sent their kids to school, and they deal with that. The people who are coming out who need the most services, who need primary services, are people who, the brown-gray divide includes all people of color. It's basically, and it's a divide where they should get the resource number, because these people are not being worthless, not being deserved, et cetera, I guess the best example in this state is that our legislature, as our state rounds, our legislature reduces the amount of money it spends on public education.
Well, I'll start by just saying I think it's time for a new generation of leadership. I mean, we've seen members of Congress that are there for 40 years. And I think certainly the three of us here, the four of us as candidates are, I think, a breath of fresh air for a new generation of leadership. And I think that's how we start to solve the problem, is making sure that we have people who have grown up with diversity being a priority in our communities, and see the challenges that we face and trying to fix it. Acknowledging what problems we face is the first challenge, I think, for us.
Yeah, and with respect to my colleagues here on the panel, one of us will be the next congressperson for this district. And, you know, I talked about it earlier when we talked about priorities, and, you know, and concurrence with Thomas, you know, talking about the next generation of leaders, and the fact that we have currently, you know, one of the oldest legislatures serving in Congress today, and not much is being done to reach back to be able to prepare the next generation of leaders. You know, as we look at the kind of legislation that is more aligned with those families of generational, who have the generational wealth, who control our country, and whether or not others have opportunities to be able to do that. We see in this community, for example, this community has been considered a very entrepreneurial community, and we see organizations like my wife's Jane Boyd Community House that is creating entrepreneurial opportunities for people of color and for families or people who come from poverty, who are interested in creating their own or building their own businesses and going into entrepreneurship to have those types of opportunities. And sorry for going over. I was trying to get it out here, you know what I mean?
So I think one of the things is making people, I think, kind of to your question specifically, helping those people to understand that these programs and these resources actually are a value to them, even though it may not be directly. So my whole platform is about helping people become their most productive self. And that's because if we want to have the best country, we want everybody in the country to be able to be their best, most productive self. And that's going to help our economy, which then helps everybody. So I think framing that for older white Americans and letting them know that, yeah, it does actually make sense for your tax dollars to help pay for someone's college education that you might not know, because then that person has the training and the skills they need to go and do things in the economy and help our country stay ahead of other countries in investments and in technology. So I think it's helping them understand what that benefits is to them, because everybody is concerned about themselves. I mean, that's just the reality. So I think you have to frame that argument there. And I have a Main Street Market Small Business Development Plan that helps deal with wealth inequality and investment to start their people's own companies. So please have information about that on my website. So thank you.
You want to ask the final question?
Well, this is the well, there's two questions.
Okay, 2 questions, sorry.
So, this question says, a statement was made earlier that many minorities are not taking leadership roles because of the lack of confidence.
That was a statement made earlier?
Yeah. I'm not sure what that says. It looks like it's... Yes, please.
It was alluded to that many minorities don't step up because of maybe lack of confidence. My question is, when Barack Obama ran for president, the time was saying we're not ready for a black president. In the state of Iowa, is it possible that maybe a lack of confidence, but also the perception of the glass ceiling that maybe existed? And if so, what steps would you take to address that issue?
If it's okay if I respond first, since that was kind of my comment, but yeah, and when I talked about confidence, that's really kind of related to that. There's this idea that am I going to have an opportunity to do this? Am I going to have an opportunity to really be considered seriously? And so I think women and minority potential candidates think that maybe they're not going to be taken seriously or realistically, and that's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about that lack of confidence. And so I think as a party, we just have to make that a priority, encouraging those people. When we look at a race, there should be no race in Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, or Waterloo where there's an open primary that we don't have minority candidates and women candidates and everything else. Like, if we don't have those candidates in there, we should go find some and get them out there, because even if they don't end up winning, they're going to bring forth those issues and that discussion in that process that's going to add value, and some of them are going to win because some of them are going to be the best candidates. So I think it's just sort of about having that intentional looking for that and asking for that. We did that with our delegate process to the national delegation. We go out there and we say, hey, what's the percentage of minorities or that you have in your community? Did we fill that? And it's a real charge, because it's like, if we didn't, why not? You know what I mean? Like, and so we should be asking that question.
Anybody else want to address that? Or?
Yeah. So when I was making the decision of whether or not to enter this race, some folks that I respected an awful lot said to me, George, you could win this race. I just need to see more confidence in you. And that was something that no one has ever told me in my life, that I lacked confidence. I served 31 years in the Army. I've been a lot of places and I've done a lot of things. And I don't think at the time it was because I lacked confidence in myself. It was because I lacked confidence in whether or not the system would support a candidate who looks like me running for federal office in a state where no one like me has ever won. And certainly we know that Barack Obama won here twice. But Barack Obama doesn't live in Iowa. And while he certainly represents folks here, he doesn't represent Iowans. And so I think what happens is more young people of color, more people of color have to begin to see people who look like them willing to take this charge and to take on the aspect of running for political office. We see it all the time in Waterloo. We see it in Davenport. We see it in Des Moines. We need to see it more here in Cedar Rapids and in other communities within this district. And so hopefully and prayerfully, my personal experience will be one that will serve as an example, much like meeting the young people at the school today, and there'll be more young people who look like us who will take this opportunity to run.
Yeah, I would say we talked about having role models and ideals, and George is right there. And I think one thing, people need support structures. I don't care who you are, you need a support structure to do this. And I think that's one thing that President Obama had. It took him a while to build, but he built a support structure, even here in Iowa, that people would stand up for him, they knew he could count on. And we have to do that in our own communities. And it takes, again, finding people that want to succeed, that want to make a difference, that want to put themselves out there and encouraging it, fostering it. And I think I don't have a silver bullet in order to figure out how to do that. But we have to be willing to put ourselves behind others who we know have good intentions and help them get there.
Okay, I got the last question. So the last question, we're going to role play. This is not formal, right?
All right.
Hi, my name is Jamie Woods. I just moved to Cedar Rapids.
Nice to meet you, Jamie.
Someone told me that you were running for office. Could you tell me 3 minutes, like why I should vote for you?
I'll try to do it a little quicker. So I'm running for Congress because I think it's time to rebuild a secure middle class, to lead with our values, and to own our future. And I think the biggest challenge we're facing is that we have an economy that doesn't work for everybody. And so in order to do that, we have to invest in people, ideas, and infrastructure. And to me, that means education and healthcare. It means reigniting our lost innovation advantage through basic research, and again, investing in infrastructure so that we can make sure that we have an economy that works 10 generations ahead, not just for those that are successful right now already.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank
I wish you the
Jamie.
best.
Appreciate it.
My name is Jamie Woods. I just moved to Cedar Rapids, and I heard that you're running for office. I've dabbled a little bit in politics. Could you tell me about your platform?
Well, certainly. So first of all, let me tell you that my platform or my background is not in politics. My background is in service. I have a lifelong commitment to serving people in communities wherever I've lived. I'm focused on ensuring that every young person has an opportunity to equal and fair education. I'm dedicated to ensuring that we're doing everything we can to ensure that every citizen in this country has health care, not just affordable health care, but has health care because it's a right for everyone in the state. Look, this country is starting for a bold new leader. And it's time for us to start taking bold and courageous steps to ensure that we're providing people in this country with the kind of leadership that's necessary to move this country forward. We can no longer stand to watch everyday citizens be able to have everything taken away from them and constantly be under attack by decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. every day. Rob Lum has made it very clear that he only represents a few people in this state. I want to make it clear that I represent every citizen, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or someone who's not registered to vote. That's the kind of leadership that you need. That's the kind of leadership that I expect. And that's the kind of leader that I expect to be in Washington serving you every single day.
Well, I thank you for your time, George. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jamie Woods. I'm new to Cedar Rapids. I heard there's some folks that are running for office. Do you know any of those folks who might be running for office, and could you tell me why?
Yeah, my name's Courtney Rowe.
Hi, Courtney.
And I'm actually running for U.S. Congress here in District 1. My background is I'm an engineer, and I've also spent a lot of time volunteering with the Democratic Party. And the reason why I'm running for Congress this time is because I believe in America. And I believe in the potential of every American. And I think that our country needs to change so that we invest in the potential of all of those Americans and help people to become their best, most productive self. I think that's what brings us to our best country, whether that's healthcare. You need healthcare if you're sick, you can't do your best work. You need clean water. If you don't have clean water, you're not going to be able to do your best work. You need the education and job training that you need, which is why I support tuition-free college education and trade school, because if you don't have the skills you need, you can't be your best. And I also have 2 plans, one to help expand green energy in our state and across the country, and also a plan to help address wealth inequality by expanding small business investment opportunities. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just help every American get their best shot and help America be the best country that it should be.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Courtney. And it's nice and refreshing to see women running for office. I wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
That last role play seemed like it was the most difficult part of the whole thing. And it should have actually been the easiest one for all of us,
Right,
right?
we just sat there, Carol put that at the last minute, so.
Thank you.